I married a champion college debater 40 years ago, which meant if I wanted to survive dinner conversation, I had to learn logic fast. But here's the thing, most of us were never really taught critical thinking. Now, I can't blame my parents. They were both academic and we had really good conversations. But formal logic was not something I was familiar with. Instead, most of us just absorb whatever's around us, whatever sounds good or feels right. And these days, what gets clicks and likes? By midlife, you've probably seen what that costs in politics, relationships, faith. Learning logic is not just about being argumentative. It's about figuring out why something that sounds off probably is, and being able to name the problem. So today we're diving into 12 of my favorite logical fallacies that everyone should know, especially if you've lived long enough to recognize nonsense when you hear it. This is one of my favorite topics, so come along. Number 1 is argumentum ad hominem. The literal translation is argument against the person. Usually it's just called ad hominem or even ad hom, and it's basically a personal attack instead of an attack on the argument. If you're dismissing or attacking the person making a claim instead of answering the claim, that's ad hom. Here's one example. Don't listen to her budgeting advice. She's terrible with money. Now there may be validity to that, and Dave Ramsey would like it. But the truth is, someone who's broke might actually still have good budgeting advice, and they might be able to tell you how they failed, but also maybe just their circumstances put them in a position that made them broke, apart from their budgeting advice. Now here's another example that you have probably heard lately. No uterus, no opinion. This argument disqualifies the speaker based on sex rather than on the soundness of the argument being made. As an aside, no uterus, no opinion also overlaps with the genetic fallacy, which judges a claim by its source rather than its content. The argument came from a man, so it must be invalid. That's a source-based dismissal, not a rebuttal. Fallacy number 2 is the straw man. It's misstating or exaggerating someone's view to make it easier to attack. Think of it this way. Instead of attacking your real firm argument, I'm going to build up an argument out of straw just so I can punch it down or burn it down really easily. Here's an example. Person A says, government spending is completely out of control. And person B's rebuttal is, so you want to get rid of Social Security and let old people starve? Not a sound argument. Number 3 is bifurcatio, and no one calls it that. It literally means division into 2 parts, but the common name is false dilemma, sometimes called black and white thinking, and I'm sure you've heard of that. It's when you're pretending there are only 2 options. It's either this or this. Nothing else exists. Here's an example you may have heard on an infomercial. If you're not doing this extreme workout plan, you're lazy. If you don't embrace AI, you're hopelessly outdated. The truth is, life rarely offers only 2, usually extreme choices. Oversimplifying complex issues forces those false extremes. Number 4 is circulus in probando. Literally, that means circle in proving, but you've probably heard it as circular reasoning. This means using the conclusion as part of its own support, like reasoning in a loop. So here's an example. He deserves an A because he's an excellent student. Why is it circular? Well, the evidence, the excellent student, depends on the conclusion, the he deserves an A. Neither is defined independently. There's a subset of circular reasoning called petitio principii. The literal translation is assuming the initial point. The common name, begging the question. Now, people misuse the phrase begging the question all the time, even really, really smart people. They'll say, that begs the question, da-da-da-da. When what they really mean is, that makes me want to ask you, or that raises the question, but that's not what begging the question means. In logic, begging the question means assuming what you're supposed to be proving. You're sneaking your conclusion into your premise. It's a kind of circular reasoning dressed up to sound intelligent. So here's an example of actually begging the question. A woman is someone who identifies as a woman. You heard that lately? This uses the term being defined to define itself. It doesn't offer any independent criterion. Bad argument. Number 5 is argumentum ad consequentiam. The literal translation, argument to the consequences. You may have heard this as appeal to consequence. So here's the definition. It's arguing that a claim must be true or false based on whether the result of believing it would be pleasant or unpleasant, whether you'd like it or not. It confuses what we want to be true with what actually is true. Here's some examples. Free will can't exist because that would make people responsible for their actions. Hey, I don't mind not being held accountable for my actions. How about this? This diet has to work because otherwise I've wasted all that money. Maybe you have. Truth isn't determined by our comfort. Reality doesn't adjust itself to protect our feelings. Facts don't care about your feelings. You ever heard that one? Number 6 is argumentum ad populum. The literal translation is argument to the people, but it's also known as a popularity appeal or the bandwagon. Treating popularity as proof of truth. Here's an example from just this week. I saw an Instagram reel that I thought presented an issue poorly, and I commented and said what I thought was wrong with the position being given. A woman responded to me and said it must be correct because it got thousands of likes and lots of positive comments. Popularity measures appeal, not accuracy. Number 7 is post hoc ergo propter hoc. And actually, a lot of people use the Latin for this one. This means after this, therefore because of this. But it's also called a false cause, assuming that because B follows A caused B. Here's an example. I started collagen and my skin improved. It must be the collagen. Ever since kids got social media, depression and anxiety rates skyrocketed. Social media is the cause. If two things happen together, one might cause the other. Or both might result from something entirely different. Correlation is we're studying, but not assuming. Number 8 is one of my favorites because it's super common. It is equivocation. It means quietly switching a word's meaning mid-argument. It confuses people. There's an example that has stuck in my head for decades. Bill Clinton famously said, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman." When DNA evidence confirmed he was lying, he argued that he had not perjured himself because sexual relations didn't include what actually happened. Somehow, oral copulation under the Resolute desk was not a sexual relation. He also questioned the definition of is, so there's that. Changing definitions mid-discussion may sound clever, and people do get away with it, but it destroys honest communication. Number 9, get ready for this, is argumentum ad comparativum miserium. What does that mean? The translation is argument to comparative misery, but it's usually called relative privation, or not as bad as. It's dismissing a problem because others have it worse or there are bigger issues. Here's an example. Why are you complaining about privacy when some countries don't even have electricity? Or, you shouldn't complain about your workload, at least you have a job. If taken to its logical conclusion, relative privation funnels every issue down to the one most serious problem, and everything else becomes untouchable. You can't discuss anything because it's not the one big problem. And who gets to decide what the one big problem is? Is it eternal life? You lost your job? Eternal life. Kids are starving? Well, eternal life. Logic allows multiple truths. Some problems are smaller than others, but they still matter. Number 10 is the sunk cost fallacy. It's sticking with a failing course of action because you've already invested so much. So instead of looking to its potential future value, all you look at is the past input. Here's some examples. I hate my job, but I can't leave after 20 years. I put too much into it. Here's one I've actually heard. He treats me like trash, but I can't leave. We've been together for 7 years. Sunk costs are past and usually unrecoverable. But wise choices look forward, not backward. And you make your best decisions looking at future value. Number 11 is tu quoque. Literally, it means you also. Commonly called you too, or an appeal to hypocrisy. This fallacy involves dodging an argument by pointing out the speaker's inconsistency. Here's an example. You can't tell me to save, you're in debt. Don't tell me to eat healthy food, you smoke. The truth is, a claim isn't tied to the person's consistency. Now, I want to make a clarification with regard to hypocrisy. Hypocrisy isn't merely failing to live up to your ideals. It's pretending to hold a belief or virtue you don't actually believe to appear virtuous or gain approval. So here's what I'd say is not hypocrisy. Sincerely holding a standard while admitting you struggle or even fail. If you're an alcoholic and you fall off the wagon, you can still talk about the blessing of sobriety. Here's what is hypocrisy. Pretending to hold a standard you don't actually believe to appear moral or reputable. So a politician who stands up with his wife by his side, talking about family values while having affairs. The essence is deception, not imperfection. Because if imperfection was the standard, none of us could talk about anything. Number 12 is pluribum interrogationis. It means of many questions. We usually refer to it as the complex question or a loaded question. This is a question that assumes something unproven or false within the wording so that any direct answer automatically admits guilt or agreement with a hidden premise. It's an unfair tactic. So here's the classic example of the loaded question. So tell me, when did you stop beating your wife? No? The question assumes the person has beaten his wife. If he answers with any time reference, he accepts the accusation as true. The only way to really handle it is to challenge the assumption. I reject the premise, I've never done that. Here are some other examples. Why are you against equality? When did you decide that facts don't matter? Why do you hate science? Loaded questions aren't genuine inquiries. They're just rhetorical traps designed to control the conversation. Don't fall for them. If you made it this far, congratulations. You're officially too logical to argue with on the internet now. In the description, I'll give you some fun recommendations for ways to learn more about logic and logical fallacies. It's actually really fun. Here are 2 examples. These are cartoon illustrated books. One's called Bad Arguments and one's called Loaded Language. Fun and easy to follow. And I'll link you to the logic course I taught all of my kids in our homeschool. It's a great skill to have no matter your age. Thank you for sticking it out to the end. Now don't fall for the fallacy of ignoring this channel. Please subscribe and I'll see you in the next one. And go have a rational day.